Well, welcome back. Um, I'm going to distill a story, talk about some of its implications. It's a news story. It's titled Irvine Company at the Center of a Huge Education Hack. Cybercrime. Going into the infinity there, spinning in. I'll give you sort of a quick summary of this massive hack, this hack attack. Some perpetrators hacked a widely used online grading and attendance system. And through this hack, they were able to get the personal data for approximately 820,000 current or former NYC public school students. Their data was compromised. An astounding number, almost like a million. It's just an astounding number. Here's a couple of quotes, all the info that is fit to hack. Quote, the hackers gained access to a database with the names, birthdays, ethnicities, home languages, and student ID numbers of current and former public school students going back to the 2016-2017 year. That is quite a while now. So this is being recorded in 2022. It's like 6 years. And think about all of that compromising information. That is an astounding amount. Not only amount, but also types, which are very important. Names, birthdays. Obviously very big deals in present day technology life. They say there's no such thing as a free lunch, but maybe sometimes there is. Quote, the hackers also extracted information about whether students get special education services, class and teacher schedules, and whether kids receive free lunch according to the education department. That's the NYC Department of Education. So, again, some very sensitive information. Whether or not someone's special ed, which, to me and you might not be a big deal, and I don't think it's a big deal, but if the wrong people get their hands on this information, it could cause some serious repercussions in the future. And it also deals with things like free lunch, which denotes people who are from less affluent backgrounds, which again shouldn't be a big deal, but can be depending on the future. For example, say if someone's looking to get a job, potentially HR could find out from that whether they had special education services, and they might come to some kind of conclusion which is most likely illegal and wrong, and maybe make a judgment about someone when they're making a hiring decision. Also, for later on, for kids receiving a free lunch, they might use that data later on to be pieced together through an algorithm to potentially, if someone's poor, they receive a free lunch, they might think of them as less of a good credit risk. So again, this could cascade down much further into the future. Here's a couple other quotes. The hack amounts to what is likely the largest ever single breach of personal student data in the U.S. Approximately 930,000 students in total are in the NYC public school system, so a big percentage from the over 800,000 talked about in the previous slides. Quote, the DOE, the Department of Education, asked the NYPD, the police department, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and New York Attorney General to investigate the initial hack, and requested that the state education department look into Illuminate, the company who had this data, into their compliance with student data privacy laws. So this is a huge breach, just breaking into one system that caused that much of exposure, which is a crazy amount of students being impacted. And it looks like Illuminate did not follow student data privacy laws, otherwise this might not have happened. And you can tell it's a big deal once you get the NYPD, the FBI, and the Attorney General involved. Big deal. So they're going to have a really significant challenge going forward as this gets investigated. There are four categories of compromised information that was collected: biographic, special ed, sensitive, and academic, although I would argue that all of them are sensitive. For example, biographic, the first one, you have the full names and birthdays, student ID numbers, ethnicity, and language information. Again, in terms of logging into any site, starting an account, having your full name and birthday is a big deal. That could be used by hackers for really bad things. Special education service issue number 2, whether a student receives services for disability. Again, so say if future on down the road, if a potential employer is looking to hire someone, they might discriminate against someone with a special education background, which would be really unfortunate, most likely illegal. Bad news. Number 3, sensitive information, although again most of this is sensitive, relating to economic status. For example, say if an AI algorithm somewhere down the road is trying to assess students' credit risk. They might make some kind of decision that because someone came from humble economic backgrounds, that they're not going to give them a loan, which again could be cascading down the line later on in someone's life. One of these students has been hacked. And number 4, academic information. Students' assessment grades and names of their teachers. Again, maybe there's a judgment down the line that someone's grades were poor, and a adverse decision is made against that student. Here's another quote. Certainly, date of birth, names, that is sufficient to worry about that being obtained by criminal actors. I certainly think it would be appropriate credit monitoring would be offered to victims. That's by Doug Levin, who's the National Director of K-12 Security Information Exchange. It's like a watchdog group dealing with security for students. Mr. Levin is again foregrounding that date of birth and names are really big in terms of having accounts. Something that someone, if they had it, they could really compromise the person whose this information is being hacked really bad. And at the very least, you'd think, as he says, that this Illuminate company should be providing credit monitoring indefinitely in the future, just so that these students, if there's something that goes on badly about them down the road, that they could be helped and remunerated. Another quote, Illuminate said in a statement that its investigation into, quote, unauthorized access of our systems found that, quote, some personal information was involved. Yeah, that seems to be pretty self-evident. Thank you for your illuminating statement, Illuminate. Quote, we are in the process of notifying customers that may have been affected. There is no evidence of any fraudulent or illegal activity related to this incident. As they say now, sometimes these kids, many of them were very young. However, somewhere down the road, this information could be used when these students have some kind of economic means. If you're 12 years old, you're probably not worth that much, but I'm sure down the road, they could be worth a lot more. This is about a letter. In the coming weeks, the New York City Department of Education said it will work with Illuminate to send the families of each of the roughly 820,000 students affected by the breach of an individualized letter explaining what specific data was compromised. Wow. Again, this is a terrible thing to happen. I'm not really sure, except for, again, helping these people who are victims know how they're potentially could be compromised in the future. This is such a minor way to help them out. It's nice to know what could happen in the future, but it's not really helping them out a lot. Finally, the implications, probably the most important part. We need to remember that any data, even if it's held by a reputable organization like the New York City Department of Education, no data is safe. We need to sort of do whatever we can to protect ourselves. It looks like the second point, we need higher data privacy standard adherence. As the New York City Department of Education has found out, this company, this vendor that worked for them, they did not seem to deal with and adhere to these standards, and this has caused at least partially this data breach. From this all, we need truly informed consent when students and families are giving valuable information, sensitive information like dates of birth, names, possibly however that's being collected, economic information. They need to know what they're giving in the truest and most clear sense, because otherwise it's not informed consent. And then when things like this happen, although they're horrible, at least they know what just happened. We need to really revisit, I would argue we need to really revisit data collection categories. Some of the categories, it sounds like information that doesn't necessarily need to be collected by the New York City Department of Education. Say things like free lunch stats and other stats. Again, maybe they're trying to make getting some data to make some research down the road that maybe students who need free lunches, they're poor, maybe they're at risk of worse academic achievement, but they need as much of whether that is that useful being collected. That should definitely be revisited. We would definitely need an opt-out option. Students and their parents and their guardians should be able to opt out if they from giving this information to the DOE, especially in the aftermath of this data breach. And finally, there needs to be some kind of insurance for victims. And I'm referring to kind of the long tail of this. If someone down the line, if like say if you're 15 years old, you don't have a lot of economic might at this moment. If someone down the road 10 years from now has a person's name, their date of birth, and other meta information, like maybe where they live, et cetera, in 10 years when these people are worth something, that information could be really valuable, and their lives could be compromised by someone assuming their identity, maybe messing around with their credit, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this probably doesn't, as Illuminate said, this might not have a lot of data breach implications now, but in 5 years and 10 years, it could be much worse. So that was Irvine Company, the center of a huge education hack. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.